My guest at this time is Dr. David Curry. He's the president and CEO at Open Doors USA. We want to get his reaction to Friday's news that Turkey is releasing American pastor Andrew Brunson after keeping him in prison and then under house arrest and eventually convicting him on charges that our government certainly believes are trumped up on espionage and terrorism. But he is coming home now, and so what's the lesson from this, and what's the reality for believers in Turkey now as the Erdogan government seems to be clamping down far more than ever? And Dr. Curry, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Well, let me read briefly from an NBC report on this news. A Turkish court on Friday ordered the release from house arrest of an American pastor at the heart of a diplomatic dispute between Turkey and the U.S. The court sentenced Andrew Brunson to 3 years and 1.5 months in prison after convicting him on terrorism charges, but he was ordered released on time served after spending nearly 2 years in detention. The North Carolina native broke down in tears when the decision was announced, witnesses said. He had earlier made an impassioned plea to the judge, quote, "I am an innocent man. I love Jesus. I love Turkey." What's your reaction, first of all, to the news that he's on his way home?
Well, very relieved. It was an injustice that's been done here, but we're thankful that he's been released. I think it's the right decision to send him back to his home in North Carolina. He's been a part of Turkey for over 20 years. He's been a faithful pastor there, a great part of the community, good citizen. This was a political issue. They tried to use him as a pawn in a larger political game. It did not work. We're grateful that the administration really held the line on this and was able to get him released.
Yes, the Trump administration was being pressured by the Turkish government to exchange a person named Fethullah Gulen, a cleric who is from Turkey, now living in the U.S., and Erdogan believes is largely responsible for the failed coup attempt against him a couple of years ago. And ultimately, the Trump administration did not agree to that swap. So what does that tell us about the way our government should respond to situations like this?
Well, I think there's a couple of things here to note on that point. One is that we can't send a signal that hostage diplomacy is going to work. And in that way, it was a very good move not to get into that. Secondly, what the Trump administration did is that they properly used economic sanctions to seek his release, and it had a tremendous effect on their currency. It also shows that this was always a political issue. It wasn't an issue for the courts, as the Turkish government has stated. It was a political issue. He was imprisoned on a political issue. They made it political. They made it also about his Christian faith, interestingly. And that's why the whole political world really stood against it. People from the EU, the United States. It was an easy thing for people who like freedom and freedom of religious expression to stand up against. But Turkey, in the end, now has done the right thing, and we want to be happy with that. I don't think anything along the way, though, was the right move for them up until this point.
Talk about what it's like to navigate the realities of that region, Turkey all the way through the Middle East. A lot of people think that instead of swapping out the cleric for Pastor Brunson, we've ultimately agreed to put some pressure on Saudi Arabia, who may have killed one of its own journalists at its consulate inside Turkey here. So it's obviously a very complicated part of the world and a very difficult part of the world. So how do you navigate it?
Well, I don't think we can draw that conclusion at this point, especially when if Saudi Arabia truly has taken this journalist, it stands on its own. They've made their own problems, if that's in fact the case. I have no way of knowing. That's well outside my expertise.
Yeah.
Well, I think, though, that Turkey has always been a real bridge, obviously, between the East and the West. They have, I think, given some of that up if they move towards an extremist agenda. Western governments, and I think others as well, really have depended on them to try to help to bridge that gap culturally. Now, if President Erdogan is going to placate extremists, he's going to use Christians as pawns in his political game, I think they're going to give away a lot of their political influence, and I think it will be to their detriment.
Dr. Curry, what are you hearing from other believers inside Turkey? There's been a lot of talk about increased repression, increased radicalization from Erdogan, either for his own protection or just because of the predominant Muslim population there. But what are you hearing from folks on the ground there?
They're concerned. Yeah, they're concerned. Many people have known Andrew Brunson. They were perplexed because he's not a political actor. So first of all, that was very concerning. Secondly, some of the more increased raids on churches and these kinds of things that are happening in Turkey are sending signals that the environment is changing there.
Dr. Curry, I quoted the statement from Pastor Brunson. I'm an innocent man. I love Jesus. I love Turkey. He's been through a lot here. He's been through house arrest. He's been through imprisonment, nearly 2 years in detention, ultimately sentenced to 3 years and 1.5 months. They let him out for time served. That's an incredibly stressful, difficult time, to say the least. And he appears to have not wavered in his faith at all. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a signal to a lot of us and what an encouragement that is. So many Christians I talk to around the world who've gone through persecution, I could say the same thing. To see them stand in their faith is great encouragement in the midst of, whatever small problems we have. I think we take encouragement in that. I think it also is a signal to us to really take the lessons of people who go through harder things than we do. When we face discouragement or opposition or even some sort of resistance or persecution, stand in Jesus, and it is the solution. It's the medicine we need for a broken heart, and I think Pastor Brunson is an example of that quite well.
Dr. Curry, it's a big day and a day that finally has a happy ending for him and his family who have been through so much. Thank you, sir, very much for your time today. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Dr. David Curry is president and CEO of Open Doors USA, one of the leading organizations worldwide assisting the persecuted Christian church. I'm Greg Columbus reporting for Radio America.